Welcome to the Holy Bible series, books 17 through 19, which will be Esther, Job, and Psalms. Now, what's it going to do, Esther? Because Esther is, it's not in everybody's Bible, but it's one of those books to where it's like, come on. You understand history. One of the reasons why I put out these ancient history series, so you can understand what's happening, what's taking place, and how they're trying to cover up actual history and try to make things fit and make sense. This is one of those books where they're trying to do this. And if you understand history as we've been talking about it, you'll get it. And when we get into Job, you'll see, they're not really keeping up with the story. They'll deviate. And, we left off with Nehemiah and, what's befalling the Jews. But really, when we pick up in Psalms, it's really going to be getting into, King David, 2 Kings. That's really the story, because for some reason, we'll see what everything that happened with Nehemiah. When we start getting into the Psalms, they're more talking about King David when it opens up, because this is the parts we really need to understand. Not so much the story, but the people and, the Easter eggs that they talk about in that story. But when we pick up in Job, when we get over there to Job, when we get to Psalms, we'll dig more into Kings, more so than Nehemiah. And, we'll get into the reason for that, because we're going to have to come back to these books later in this whole thing. But with Esther, it's them trying to fix something that we're going to address in Psalms. And when we go through those histories and talk about this stuff, you're going to see, why they have to put this in there to try to make sense, because we got into the Babylonian exile. And Esther takes place about 100 years after this exile. So now this whole thing is about, you have a 2-day Jewish holiday called Purim. This is a real Jewish holiday that they still celebrate to this day. Esther is the reason why. So we have an actual holiday for Jews. And we know they get most of this stuff from the Bible, of course, so shouldn't be shocked. But this story is what's behind it. So story goes, and what they're trying to do is try to explain a huge problem. It's a huge flaw in their storytelling. And the only way to explain it is with a story like this. Because one of the things you will have to explain, as I talked about before, there's no way these Hebrews could be going out, battling, killing, doing what they have done, and not come in contact with the Greeks or the Persians. And especially since we're talking about traveling back and forth the way they've been traveling, them being scattered as well. Because remember, around this time, Persians are conquering, and they're pretty brutal, and they're slaughtering everything and everybody. So how is it that these, Jews are able to survive in pockets, right? So Esther takes place within a city that's ruled by a Persian king. And you have Mordecai, who is the uncle of Esther. Now, the king of Persia is a drunken partier who likes to have a bunch of fun, and he's throwing a big party. And I'm going to run through the story real quick, because we're not going to spend that much time in Esther. But he's having a big party, and he basically tells his wife to go and show off her beauty. She refuses to do so. So he basically makes a decree that, hey, Persian men are going to be the lords of their household, and women should basically obey them. And then after this, he does like a beauty pageant for, his new wife, to find a new wife. So Esther and her uncle, they're Jews. So you have Persian, you have the Jews, which we know this is a problem. So she hides the fact that she's a Jew, and she enters the pageant, and she wins and marries the king, right? So her uncle is basically, poking around, and he overhears 2 guards plotting to kill the king. So he goes and tells Esther, she tells the king, basically save the king's life. And he basically, promotes the guy and give him a position and just helps her uncle out and thanks him, for saving his life, basically. The two men are hanged. Now, after this, you have Haman. Haman is promoted by the king, the Persian king. Haman is like supposed to be this huge deal, and everybody's supposed to kneel before him whenever they see him or what have you. Kind of like a salute in an officer situation. But Mordecai, when he sees him, he doesn't do anything, kind of give him a dirty face. And, Haman's upset. He's not having that. But he finds out that, Mordecai's a Jew. So what he does, because his family, his, grandfather, what have you, they are the enemies of the Jews. So he basically tricks the king and talks to the king, get him drunk and talk him into killing all the Jews, right? So they basically pick a day. And to pick this day, he basically rolls a dice called a pur. And he rolls the dice to pick the day. So they have the day mapped out to where, they're going to kill the Jews or what have you. So he makes this decree that Jews are going to die. And of course, they can't allow this to happen. So they're trying to figure out what can they do. So, wife basically holds a little meeting between her husband and Haman, tells him that, hey, I'm going to have this banquet, that you guys got to come to, this other party you guys got to come to. And, talk about some stuff. So on the way out, Haman leaves and he runs into Mordecai again. And he's pissed off at Mordecai because he still won't salute him or bow to him. So the king basically goes to sleep. He can't sleep. He's having bad dreams. Basically calls in somebody to interpret his dreams and to read back the royal decrees. And he sees that, oh, wait a minute, this dude saved my life. I can't, kill the Jews because one, I'm alive because of one. So Mordecai basically comes in to see the king later and say, hey, we got to kill these Jews. We got to kill Mordecai. He got to go. And the king says, nope, we're not going to kill Mordecai. In fact, we're going to praise him. And you're going to go around and tell everybody of the good deed that he did saving the king's life. So he's got to parade Mordecai on a horse around through the town and praise him to the people that, hey, this dude saved the king. So they do have this banquet, the second banquet that Esther invites them back to. And she basically, lays it all on the king. Hey, I'm actually a Jew. This dude tricked you into killing the Jews. But because of the decree, he can't rescind the royal decree. So he creates like a counter decree, to basically fix the problem. And he tells the Jews to defend yourself. So to basically defend themselves against anybody that tries to kill them or anybody that's plotting to kill them. So the first day they defend themselves. The second day, anybody who tried to kill them or is plotting to kill them, they'll go out and wipe them out. And the Jews are successful. They go and kill Haman's family and everybody like that. And then they basically celebrate, what happened, that they're saved and they were able to fight and save themselves because of the Persian king. Mordecai is basically elevated to, second in command next to the king. And then they create this Jewish holiday called Purim, which is named after the dice pur that, Haman threw to decide what day they was going to die. So understand, that's the story. But we understand clear as day why that's here is to explain, one, how in the world they were able to survive the Persian Empire all that time. Remember, the Persians come in and conquer the Egyptian Empire. Israel was part of the Egyptian Empire. If these people were there or anywhere near there, scattered, what have you, they would have been wiped out. So this is how they try to inject this thing into history and try to make an excuse as to, well, wait a minute, during this time, second in command of Persia was one of our guys. So that's why the Persians, spared us because the second in command was one of our dudes. That's how we're going to make up for this whole thing. And then it just gets your mind to wondering, maybe this was possible. Could have possibly happened. And the story seems feasible because today they still actually, celebrate this holiday. So it is up to the reader or anybody to really look at the story. First of all, God, it's another thing. God does not appear at all in the story. Nothing about God in the story. It's clearly a story put in there to try to fix up, like almost an afterthought. Oh, wait a minute. We got to fix this problem. Let's throw this story in there. And I suspect this happened throughout the Bible where we have these little interludes, which we're going to see with Job and in Psalms, how that goes, where they're injecting these stories. Now, Esther is the last part of the histories. So, we have the law, we have the histories, and then we're getting into now, unfortunately, the poems, as we'll talk about in Job coming up. But it's there to fix a problem that they knew was going to be a problem. And for anybody who don't know history or, don't understand what's happening, what the stuff's about, it's plausible. It makes you think, like, this is a possibility. This could have happened. But clearly, the story is there to try to fix the Persian problem. So, believe it or not. But yeah, let's get into Job. We know where we left off in Kings, which is really where the story ends off. We got into Nehemiah and Esther, and kind of sort of goes away from the story of the Israelites and basically what we're getting into here. But a lot of people don't understand. So getting into Job. With Job, which a lot of people don't realize, Job is not an Israelite. And you got to understand what they're trying to do here. Job is not an Israelite. He's not a Hebrew. So they're getting into a part of the Bible to where it's persuasion. It's like, okay, we fed you all these books of laws and history and bullshit, basically. So now we're trying to get you into a separate understanding that's going to confuse you more and help you to accept our stories. So with Job is not even really, you can get into the story and read. It's a lot of Easter eggs in there, too many to get into. But the overall point of Job, when you read, is to really get you to understand that, shit is going to happen in life and you're going to question it. And since they know they have promised you something that they cannot deliver on, and I always say, if you promise something that you can't deliver on, or if you offer a reward or a prize in a contest that you don't want nobody to win, you make the rules of that contest impossible, to follow. You make them impossible to achieve. And that is what's happening with the Bible. And when you understand that, you're promised all these things and you're told you can get these things if you are perfect. But then there's confusion because they tell you if you pray, you can get these things. But then you're dealing with the guilt of everyday life and living and surviving or what have you. And you're not living right by what the Bible says is correct before God. So you figure, well, that's not the reason I'm not getting what I'm supposed to get. So, how do you, deal with all this? How do you make sense? And that's what Job is about, to get you into an understanding that you can be following God and stuff can go wrong in your life. And there's a reason behind it. But if you stay true to God, you will be okay. But deeper stuff to Job. One of the points, again, is this dude is not a Hebrew. So remember, you have, sons of God or the angels or what have you, basically having a meeting with God, and Satan shows up. And it's like, okay, here's this contest, basically. So God is boasting to Satan, consider my servant Job. Now understand what's happening here. Again, this is not a Hebrew. So what are they trying to say to you? That you don't have to be a Hebrew. You don't have to be one of God's chosen people to have favor with God. You just have to be a person that is following God. So that completely confuses everybody when you start to look at the story this way, because it's like the Hebrews are the chosen one. What is so important about Job that Job, when you read Job, he understands about prayer. He understands about God. This guy is not a Hebrew. So how is it that Job has decided that he understands the God of Israel and praying to the God of Israel and doing everything correctly, and is getting blessed by God, but he's not a Hebrew? But the Hebrews are going out and killing all these people who are not Hebrews, who are not following or worshiping God, but they're also not Hebrews. So now you have this whole thing where people are looking at it and saying, well, wait a minute, I cannot be a Hebrew, because remember, you're trying to get everybody to accept this, but I can't, I don't have to be a Hebrew or a Jew if I'm following God and his commandments, and I can still be blessed by God. Now, this story takes place in Uz, or however you want to pronounce it, UZ, which is not in Israel. And they don't really give any historical context as to where this whole thing is supposed to take place. And again, this is not a Hebrew. He's not an Israelite. And, the story goes, and God basically say, consider Job my servant. And Satan is like, well, this dude is only basically worshiping you because look at him. He got everything. He got wife and bunch of cattle and friends and family and so on and so forth. You basically made his life good. Of course, he's going to praise you. So, the little wager is on, and Satan goes down there and start killing shit and killing cattle, and the people coming back one at a time to Job like, hey, cattle died. Hey, this happened, and stuff fell down on your oxes and on your sheep and what have you. And then lastly, the house falls down on his family that's eating, and he's just left with his wife, who basically is condemning him like, dude, you wrong. Something happened. You did something. God doesn't like you anymore, or what have you. So he's trying to figure out what's going on, but he's still giving praise to God. And then, as more stuff happened, because Satan's last thing he does is he comes down and he gives Job all these boils because, he goes to God and God's like, see, I told you, you're still going to be cool. But yeah, let me risk his life, because anybody would do anything to save their life or say anything to save their life. So all these oozing boils all over his body and what have you, Satan puts on him. And then that's the last we see of Satan in the book of Job. He basically exits. And then like whatever point he was trying to make with Satan and God, you don't really understand the point, which is getting you to understand. And it has nothing to do with that. This is about you, and it's trying to tell you something. Of course, we're going to look at it and say, well, why would God try to impress the devil or have any type of bet with the devil, for anybody that's praising him? It doesn't fit. It doesn't make sense. But the story is to you, the reader, to really understand. But then he has 3 friends that come. And the 3 friends also not Hebrews. So it's Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, I believe, the Temanite, the Shuhite, and the Naamanite. Which you would think is, from the tribes, but not. But they have that funny name. But these guys come, and they basically telling him, hey, you did something wrong, or you sinned against God, and they're giving him all these reasons why they believe this is happening to him. And he's like, whatever, walks off, forget you guys, you don't know what you're talking about. So, this happens, and Job is basically pissed, and he starts to curse God and, say God is a bully and all this and that. And then his 3 friends are, who are you to basically, you're wrong to talk against God, and who are you to say something against God, and so on and so forth. So they go on to basically talk to you, the reader, when they're saying, he's talking to Job in the book, but it's basically to you, saying that God punishes the bad, rewards the good, and so on and so forth. So this is to get you into the whole thing that, okay, if I do good, if I do what I'm supposed to do and follow the commandments and follow God, things are going to be good. But, possibly this whole thing happened, for you to read it to discern. Maybe this whole thing happened to God, happened to Job, because God was trying to, prove a point or to test him. And that's the main thing. God is going to test you. And you hear that a lot from preachers. So again, this story is to you. And it's one of these things where you can get really caught up in the book of Job, but the overall thing is speaking to you and to get you sucked into the faith. This is a theme for this section of the Bible, as you'll see as we go on. This is the theme for this section. So it's really getting into, I said, the prayers, the praises, the songs, or what have you. And all this is to really get you more, entrenched into the whole Bible story and glory of God with these stories. As we talked about with the Esther story and Nehemiah, you see what happened there. So these are just separate stories to just really bring you in more, and kind of like an interlude into the main story, if you look at it from a play sort of view. So enters Elihu the Buzite, who is also not an Israelite, who is basically talking to Job and saying, well, yeah, you could be right about some things, but, you have no right to basically curse God and to say this and that. And, Job is like, okay, well, look at what's happening to me. And, I've done this. And he just whole list of things he's done, how much he's praised God. Now, God eventually responds to Job and, basically catches him out and says to him, well, Were you there when I created, heavens and earth? Were you there when I created the animals? Were you there? Basically giving him a quick rundown of all the stuff he's done. Who are you to question me? Can you tame Leviathan? And can you go near these beasts that I've been there and created? You would basically call them gods if you was near them instead of cursing me. You wouldn't curse Leviathan or you wouldn't curse these beasts, but you would curse me, God, who has given you so much, so on and so forth, which is all stuff to get you out of your rational mind and thinking, well, wait a minute, I've done what I was supposed to do. Like, I don't understand why I'm doing what I'm supposed to do and you do this to me for whatever reason. And again, for you to look at it and not question amazingly bad shit that's going to happen in your life to where you're going to question God. And this is to get through the whole point that none of this shit is true. If you're going to have a contest where you don't want nobody to win, as I said, you have to make the rules impossible to follow. This is real life. This Bible is impossible to follow. You can't live your life by that. And they know this. They understand the rules are impossible. So shit is going to happen to you in life. People are going to die. You're going to get hurt. You're going to be praising God and going to the church and everything like that and stuff. It's not going to work out. And that's what this story is, to get you into the whole thing that, no matter how much praise you give or how good you are before God, and if God is even bragging about you, something can happen or God can tempt you or test you. And then you're supposed to be strong through, your faith and through the test. And if you are, then you'll come out on the end okay. Because what happens with Job? All this stuff happens and God says what he says and basically cusses him out. And then Job, repents and bows down. I'm sorry, Lord, and this and that, and you're right, or whatever. And then what happens in the end? God basically, new wife, new kids, new money and cattle or what have you. He gets everything back basically. So Job is one of those things where, when you understand how the Bible is structured, you can read it and understand exactly the reverse psychology bullshit they're trying to pull off. Because by this point in the Bible, if you're reading, you're not looking at God the same. There's no way you're looking at this and saying that this God is saying something is wrong with this dude. Something is wrong with these Hebrews. They're crazy. Something is not right. So this will be one of the things that the preacher will skip to this story of Job. Because if you don't put the story of Job in order, in context to everything that's happening, as far as understanding it, it's just the poetry portion of the Bible. And in this, it's poetry, it's songs, which we're going to get into next with Psalms. And you will understand why it's there. And then looking at everything that came before, as we have went through, why this is put here. You understand? So it's like the book of Job is not really, if you want to go through it and read it, you'll waste your time. It's other stuff in there that, we'll come back to in the New Testament. As I said, when we get to the New Testament, we'll be coming back to the Old Testament because there's a lot of things that we got to match up. But no point in getting into it now because it's not going to make sense until we go to the New Testament. And which is why we'll come back to these books. But that's basically Job. No real reason to get too much deeper into it because that's what it's about. It's reverse psychology. It's to get you to understand why bad shit happened and, God is not there for you. He could be testing you. So stay faithful in prayer and stay faithful to him and everything can be rectified. So when stuff go bad in your life, what do people do? They go pray, but they also, frantically try to fix it. And then when they fix it, God's testing you. You see memes all the time. God is testing you. Be careful. God could be testing you. Your bad times could be God testing you. And then I don't know nobody that if you're struggling or you're going through something, you got to get up and go do something about it. Now, if you go get up and do something about it and it changes your situation, that's on your strength. You did that. No higher power did that for you. And why would God put you in that position anyway if you're supposedly living right by the Bible? So now the deeper book to get into is Psalms. And Psalms is deep. Even though we're talking about poetry, songs, and prayers, 150 of them, by the way, which is why Psalms are so long. It's basically like, Chronicles, kind of going through the Bible and stuff that happened. Because now it's trying to get you ready to get back into the story, you might as well say. But let's go through it and understand what happened is what Psalms is about. And stories about what happened. Because now when we leave off with 2 Kings, everything's messed up, you have this whole, cycle of king coming, and then, people worshiping other gods. Then somebody comes and messes up the kingdom, and then somebody brings the kingdom back and start praising everything right. That king dies, the next king does the same thing over and over again. And this is what we see. This is how it left off. But with Psalms, it's almost like the establishment of a new covenant. It's like let's reestablish what God promised us. And let's not forget. Let's tell tales. Let's sing songs about what happened. So when you get into the first two books of Psalms, it's just basically getting into King David, because Psalms is basically split up into about 5 sections. The first couple sections are about King David and everything that happened with him. And then we get into basically the tragedy, all the bad stuff that happened. And then the last couple sections is basically about, the promise that God has promised them and everything that they have to do to fulfill this promise, or to reestablish the promise with God, and to basically get God into forgiving them for everything that happened before. Poems and praises or what have you, about the history and, to God. So the first two is basically into, as I said, King David and what happened. And then it's kind of sort of prophesizing the coming of another king that's supposed to help them through this situation. So Psalms comes from the Greek word psalmos, which basically means songs that are sung with a harp, and Greek, of course. And it's really funny because it's like, at this point in the book, what is this? Well, what is this? Why are we deviating away from the story? And it's like, when they broke down Psalms, because these are supposed to be real songs, supposed to be written and supposed to be about the history of Israel. And they found some songs a long time ago, and then they mixed them with some poems a long time ago. And all of it's supposed to be during the time where the Hebrews are in exile and scattered. And then they're trying to remember their history and what happened. So since they're not together and you got Hebrews scattered all over the place, they supposedly came up with these poems and songs to remember what happened, and to basically, be singing these songs and putting these poems out there to kind of sort of, get God to hear them and understand that they understand what happened and they understand the history and they're sorry for it. So come back and reestablish your promise to us. So let's just skip ahead to Psalms 106. Let's go to verse 29. And it's giving you exactly what I'm saying. And it says, thus they provoked him to anger with their inventions, and the plagues break in upon them. Then stood up Phinehas and executed judgment. And so the plague was stayed, and that was counted unto him for righteousness unto all generations forevermore. They angered him also at the waters of strife, so that it went ill with Moses for their sake, because they provoked his spirit to that he spake unadvisedly with his lips. They did not destroy the nations concerning whom the Lord commanded them. So they basically, as I said, going through the history of what happened and why they are where they are, but were mingled among the heathen and learned their works. And they served their idols, which were a snare unto them. Yea, they sacrificed their sons and their daughters unto devils, and shed innocent blood, even the blood of their sons and of their daughters, whom they sacrificed unto the idols of Canaan, and the land was polluted with blood. Thus were they defiled with their own works, and went a whoring with their own inventions. Therefore was the wrath of the Lord kindled against his people, insomuch that he abhorred his own inheritance. So again, they basically gone through the history. This is what happened. So it's songs and poems or what have you. And it's important because it's a lot of things to note with this whole thing, and to go back into 2 Kings and to look at what happened. Because as we're doing with the series, you're going to start going in and out with actual history and what the Bible is talking about, so you can understand the message they're trying to give you and how they're trying to convey it to you. So remember the history. You have King David, and then King David dies, and you have Solomon. You have the building. But remember, King David is the one who really wanted to build the temple. He's talking about it And Solomon's supposed to fulfill this. So Solomon comes into power, and Solomon is told specifically, hey, don't be marrying into these other civilizations and people, because they're going to have you basically going after their gods. And this is exactly what he does. He marries somebody from Egypt, and then he has a bunch of wives, and then they basically get him to do just that, and then following all kinds of different gods. So eventually, we go from Solomon, we get into Elijah comes and is swept off into a whirlwind, and then we have Elisha, who has superpowers basically, and is raising the dead and doing all kinds of stuff. And and the people are basically split. Remember, you have Judah and the people that's in Judah, and then you have the people that's in Israel, and it's split and being ruled by two different kings. We eventually get to Hezekiah, who gets help from Isaiah, and this is where they get into the whole part where they get exiled into Syria and Babylon or what have you. Hezekiah dies. And remember, they told him before he dies that when he does die, his kingdom is basically going to be in ruins. And this is when Nebuchadnezzar is supposed to come and just lay waste to Judah and Israel. And then it's basically where we leaving off with the same stuff happening over and over again with, rulers coming in and scattering the people, and then the people basically not obeying God. So this is where we basically leave off where everything messed up. And that's what the songs are about. And it's like, okay, we understand we messed up. This is what happened. We acknowledge it. And then, what are we going to do to fix it? Now, you have to notice in this story that there's a lot of involvement with Egypt, because they're trying to basically fit these people within the timelines we talk about. Because, David was supposed to fulfill the promise, that God gave, to his ancestors, and he didn't do that. Solomon, all he had to do was God was going to give him everything. He told him straight up, if you listen, you and your kids, if y'all follow me and listen, y'all basically set. Soon as y'all start basically marrying outside of the people and going against, following other gods, it's going to be a problem. And this is one of the biggest things we're going to get into in this video and upcoming videos about this, because it's going to blow your mind when we start touching on this whole other gods thing. But he doesn't do it. We see what happened. But the point is, they're trying to inject these people in a timeline with Thutmose III. So you'll see people make that reference, because this is one of the reasons why I came back up with this video, because a lot of people are getting into that. And the Bible story tells us that Solomon married one of Pharaoh's daughters. They never say the Pharaoh. They never talk about the family, the Egyptian family, except for, he married one of the pharaohs. And supposedly, Solomon's temple was built somewhere close to this Egyptian kingdom. Now, you have to understand when you read the Bible, a lot of people ain't going to pick up on this. A lot of times they're letting you understand how, and you should understand already, this is Egyptian territory. And this is how they get through all that, by not really being specific about certain places and people. Because during this time, supposedly, this is Egyptian territory. Israel is being ruled by the Egyptians. This is all black people here. So they're trying to tiptoe around this. And you understand, if you're going to be doing anything here, you're dealing with the Egyptians, and they know this. Now, the whole thing is, when you understand the story and what it's talking about in that story about Gezer being burnt to the ground, this is stuff that we can prove that Moses had this city burnt to the ground. It was rebuilt, and it was supposedly burnt down again or destroyed by Miriam Ptah. So they trying to, and this is what the Miriam Ptah Stela is about. It's one of the reasons why I went to go see it in the Cairo Museum and talk to the curator and people about that whole thing and was it edited, because in the Miriam Ptah Stela, it's talking about Miriam Ptah burning this city, Gezer, which that's what it's saying, that, but they changed it to Israel. That's broad. That's not specific enough. He didn't burn down the entire Israel. So, and I can get into that whole thing. It's changed, and none of them believe that it says Israel, but because it didn't exist around this time, of course. But this is how they're trying to make the connections and connect those dots to make these people fit within history. The thing is, when Miriam Ptah destroyed this city, this is the 13th century we're talking about. So there's no way in the world, the timeline doesn't fit with Solomon and Solomon's temple. So it doesn't fit within that timeline. So Solomon himself is supposed to have lived between, I think, 970 to like 931 BC, which we know is bullshit. So it's not fitting in that time. We don't have any proof that Solomon ever even existed. So we know this is about masonry, but Solomon's temple and everything, the way it's laid out, which we'll get into that in a different video, how that all adds up. But there was the reason why it's even here and why they even mention a temple at all, because in this place and during this time, there was a temple there that belonged to the ancient Egyptians. And the measurements of the temple is the only thing that we can find that could be on par with a Solomon's temple. Now, when you go into the Bible, it's talking about, Jewish temples being built and knocked down, then rebuilt, knocked down, and so on and so forth. And again, anybody that's in this period or around this time understand this is Egyptian territory. And all they are doing is talking about buildings that they themselves laid siege to that belonged to the Egyptians because of what was there or what happened during conquest. A lot of stuff got burnt down. And of course, they didn't want to burn down too much, but there's certain places they couldn't leave standing because everything that's in there destroys what they're trying to do. It's a lot of those places. So article popped up a while ago saying Egyptian people claims Jewish temple was never in Jerusalem, which that is big. And they're saying this Jewish place of worship was actually converted from an Egyptian building that was in Galilee, which we know it had to have some connection for them to even be talking about Galilee. Any place they mention in the Bible has to have some type of connection that they can connect themselves to. But who was actually there was the Egyptians. So it says there, I'm just going to skip to this article real fast. It says, finally, the article claims that the dimensions of the temple itself match that of ancient Egyptian temples from the Pharaonic period. What the Jews called their temple, the report says, may have been converted from an abandoned Egyptian military garrison in Palestine, which they took over. Prior to Israel taking control of the Temple Mount in 1967, there was a consensus in the Arab and Muslim world that state, now home to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, was the site of the biblical Jewish temple. Such attitudes can be seen in the 1924 guide to the Haram al-Sharif, as the Temple Mount is known in Arabic, published by the Muslim Waqf, which had no qualms mentioning the presence of two Jewish temples atop the Jerusalem compound in antiquity. In October, Sheikh Mohammed Ahmad Hussein, Mufti of Jerusalem, claimed that there was never a Jewish temple on the site, and that, in fact, the Al-Aqsa Mosque had been there since the creation of the world. Right. According to historians, the Al-Aqsa Mosque was built during the Umayyad dynasty and is believed, that's what they always like to say, believed to have been completed in 705 CE. So we understand, we know this history and timeline doesn't fit.